Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 231 of Navigating Now, coming to you live from Thaudium HQ here in Chicago, Illinois. I'm Nicole Zemas, and I'm thrilled to be hosting today's episode with our guest, Abi Olukeye, the CEO and founder of Smart Girls HQ, for a conversation on reimagining STEM for girls from classroom to career. Welcome, Abi, to the Navigating Now stage.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you for having me.
So excited to have you here today, and excited to hear more about what you're up to at Smart Girls HQ. Thanks so
Yes.
much. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
joining us. Um, I'd love it if we could start with just sharing a little bit of your story, especially like what made you want to start Smart Girls HQ.
Yeah. My story is sort of like a windy one because I initially set out to start a business because my family is entrepreneurial and I felt like I really wanted to do something to contribute to the world in a way that was impactful, but I didn't know what that would be. So this was maybe like year 10 into my corporate career. And then 3 years after that, over the period of that 3 year period, I started doing work in the innovation space and I was leading a pretty large portfolio at work. And because of that, I was getting all this training and tools on how to innovate and evaluate ideas. And so at the same time, I'm also starting to have my kids are getting older. I'm just very, our family's very young. We have at that time, my oldest daughter was 4. And then I also had a 1 year old. And so I started to learn and see different experiences through their eyes. As they were going out in the world and starting school, my oldest daughter started saying things like everything that I brought her that was STEM related, she would say they were boy things. Even color,
Mm.
right? Like things that we wouldn't talk about at home. We would never say a color was a boy color or girl color. So that immediately in my mind was like, oh my gosh, there are headwinds outside of my home that I can't control. And that made me really nervous. So, although I was busy, my thought was, let me just introduce them to as much as possible. I was just going to buy them all the things and put them in different programs and camps as they got older. And what I realized when I went out to do that, I didn't think this was going to be my business, right? So if you imagine, I had behind my mind, I want to start a business doing something, but I'm just going about my life, right? Not really sure what it would be. And then all of a sudden, I go out to try to shop to buy things for my kids so that they would stop thinking STEM was a boy thing. And there was nothing.
Hmm.
There was nothing that I found that I felt like if I brought this home to them, they would be excited, right? And in that age period, if you have nieces or children around that age, you know, like when you go shopping, you know the reaction of, when you bring something home and they're excited for it, and you know what will get them excited. And I just could not find out when it came to things that related to STEM, and they were essentially right. A lot of things did feel like boy things in the aesthetic, in the project theme. It really didn't feel like it was something that they would care for. And that was really what got me started. So that brought a problem to the forefront that matched my desire for entrepreneurship in the first place. And I started using those tools that I was learning at work, tools like the 5 why, to try to dig to like the root cause of the problem. I was basically running all these running this idea through the rigor of how I would evaluate a commercial idea at work. And that led me to actually to the academic research around this work, because I started thinking, well, I mean, what if people learned already about this? And to my surprise, the academic research was plentiful in this area in terms of what you should do, what works. And the problem was no one was taking what research had said we should do and commercializing that. And so I started playing with the idea of how do we take the best insights from, all of the talented work that researchers have done in this space over the many years that we've been studying this, and start to develop products that actually make sense for the marketplace for this. So it was that, with the combination of, I started sending insights from the research and everything I was learning to parents in a newsletter, and they were responding positively to that. And in their responses, some of them would say things like, "Can I just give you my daughter and you can do all the things?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, so that's not going to happen. So, what can I offer that allows a parent to say, okay, one, you've given me the awareness that this is a problem and this is a gap. Two, here is now what I can do to sort of fill that gap in the informal time that we have at home." And so our kits, our Dear Smart Girl kits, were really born from the desire to offer parents something that could fit in the edge of the day. I was busy already as a parent, a working parent, so I empathized with that, and I really wanted to create a product that would allow parents to feel good about the little bit of time they get to spend, so that it doubles up as bonding as well as learning. And then we also achieve the purpose of helping the young girls that get to touch this product be intelligent decision makers about what they are truly interested in and where they might want to lean more as they get older.
That's so great. So it sounds like, hearing you tell this story, it really started with your own personal experience as
Yeah.
someone with a career in a
Yeah.
STEM field, trying to bring that into your home and feeling like there was some
Yeah.
friction there.
Yeah.
Um,
There were multiple layers, because not only was I someone that was actively in a STEM career, I had studied computer science undergrad. So I had actually been a student before, and I knew what that felt like. I was one of two Black females in my entire program at the time, which I didn't even think about it then. But as I got older, realized I was working in a diversified manufacturing firm. And so that meant that I was also in an industry where there were a lot of males just working there. I was hiring STEM professionals, and so in all the dimensions that you would think about the STEM career, I had been in that pipeline in all ways. And so
mhm.
for me, it really was a light bulb to think, gosh, nothing has changed and nothing will change. Like, my kids will grow up and have this exact same experience. And that just seemed really interesting to me, because we were also, as STEM practitioners, inventing so many wonderful things and solving really hard problems. And so I'm like, how can this be impossible? It just doesn't make it. Either we're not investing in it, or we're not applying the same rigor as we would with commercial products. But I just can accept that this is so hard a problem, but we can figure out how to make cars drive without a human.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that lens on problem solving. I mean, we do take on some of the biggest problems
Yeah.
out there, and yet we experience, this friction in our social lives, or we see things happening in our small circles that we feel
Yeah.
are so big.
We're just insurmountable. It's like, wow.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that, from inception, your original idea to kind of where you are now, there's also been some kind of testing and evolving of your ideas. So walk us through a little bit, from that moment of, oh, I think this is a problem space I can operate in and create something in, to, where you are today. How has Smart Girls HQ kind of changed over time?
Yeah. So from the very beginning, thanks to my training in commercialization, and experience, I wanted to live where the users were. And I was really interested in the student users, particularly because I'm not an educator by either by training or by profession, right? And I wanted to bring tools to the education space. So I knew that my gap was in the classroom. So the first 2 years, I found my way into a partnership with a school that allowed us to bring experiences to the classroom on a weekly basis.
Mm.
And that was phenomenal. That was like the most important thing that we could do, because it allowed us to really observe learning as it was happening. We could see all the friction points with the things that the way we were thinking about designing our own learning approach. And we could see the light bulb moments, and we could see that we could see where it could work. So that in the beginning was probably the most important step that we took, rather than just jumping into creating a product. Um, from that, what we realize is that there are three stakeholders that really matter when it comes to this topic of in education period, but particularly if you're trying to target the gender gap in STEM. First is the parents, for the age group that we focus on, which is age 12 and under. um, Parents are the ones driving them to things. They don't have any money,
Mm.
they have agency, but they don't really have autonomy in terms of like what they choose to do and when they can do it and what they can pay for, right? So the parents are a very important decision maker for that age range. Then we also realized that the educator was super important, because we heard so many stories, particularly of women who said, you know what, I had no clue that STEM was an option for me. I
Mm.
wish I did when I was their age. Or I had this math teacher that really turned me off. Or I had this teacher that told me that this was not my path, right? And we realized how important um, the classroom was to the learning process, whether that is in validating and affirming or just in discovery and exposure. It was just so important. And then the third stakeholder was the corporations that they might work for. And we realized that kids were very aware as a consumer of many companies, but they
Mm.
were not aware of the producer role behind the companies that they use and enjoy. So, all the kids knew now, or even the past couple of years, all the kids knew what TikTok was, but never stopped to like think, okay, what's behind that? And how do you
Mm.
produce an app like that? And what does that take? And if I were to work at a company called TikTok, oh, by the way, I can actually work at a company called TikTok. And there are
Right.
very many different roles, and these are the kind of roles that are in there. There was just no connection to the thing that I consume and the production of the thing that I consume. And because I like to say, like, our economy over the past 10 years and probably for the foreseeable future will continue to be fueled by STEM innovation.
Right.
Science, technology, engineering, and math is what's driving all of the growth in our economy and our world, globally. And so if you are going to be a productive producer, you need to actually understand um, at varying levels what STEM is, what these tools are, what this tool set is, right? You can understand it as an expert. So not everyone needs to have mastery, but everyone needs to be able to thrive in it. And
Mhm.
so how do we get the corporations to help make that connection to the classroom? So for me, the framework was set up in my mind that you've got this three legs of a stool that the girl needs to sit on. And all three legs actually need support in our society. There is no one of those three legs that's well served right now. And so it felt like a big enough problem to tackle, but not all at the same time. So we started with the parent leg
Mm.
with our kids, and then we moved from there and started to work in schools with more like gender inclusive kits, but really using all of the research that we know gets girls excited. And then now we're doing some big work within corporations, really helping them make those connections between the careers that they're interested in filling for the future and the talents that will fill that career in the future.
Yeah. That's awesome. I wonder if you could share maybe a story of a particular learner or maybe even a typical learner that you're working with. It would be great to hear just what this looks and feels like
Mhm.
for a girl in a classroom.
Yeah, so we run a locally, so this is where we can see it. It looks many different ways across the nation because we're not always there when our products are being used. In fact, we're mostly not there when our products are being used. However, we run an accelerator for fifth graders locally in Charlotte as a way to give back to the community. It's called Smart Girl Squad.
Cool.
And it allows us to spend 20 weeks with a fifth grade class throughout the entire year. What's important about that is it's not a singular experience, it's a series of positive experiences with STEM to help drive to a specific outcome at the end of that year. What happens is they'll get a module of, for example, we break into different pathways like scientist and designer and engineer, maker, founder, explorer. Again, really making sure that they know that whatever their interest is, there's a home for them in STEM. They don't have to really be just a coder or be a doctor. But let's say we're tackling the science module. They will come in and they'll get an overview of what we're going to do. We typically wrap the module up in some sort of story. So there's like a narrative that gets them hooked and excited. And then we present a real world problem to them. We present a career that would solve that problem.
Mm.
For example, we have a one of our science modules is a pH balanced soap project, and what we say to the girls is, hey, you are going to be a cosmetic formulator today, and we make them think about all of the skincare that they use, right? And then we draw their attention to the scientific concept of pH, which is the key when it comes to your skin. So they learn about pH, they understand what pH is, and then we take that knowledge and then wrap it in. That is the basis of the activity they're going to do. So now they're going to go through three formulations using natural materials to formulate their own soap. But along the way, they're checking for pH to make sure that the pH is right for the skin. They're understanding as they're adjusting pH, whether it's too acidic or too basic and what that means. And then we offer them extra pH strips to go home and test the things that they use at home
Oh, so
and
cool.
educate their family on what's good for your skin and what's not, right?
I
So,
love
and
that.
then what I love about that activity and with all of our activities is typically in a classroom, when you do something like that, they might introduce pH and then they might give you a cup of something, a solution, and then give you pH strips. And all you're doing is just testing pH strips like, oh, this
Right.
one has a pH of 4 and pH of 5. That's fine. But the reason why that's not as effective as, oh, I just made an entire product hinged on this particular scientific concept is then the girls say things like, huh, I wonder how you make nail polish. I wonder how you make dishwashing soap. I wonder how you make perfume. All of a sudden, we've unlocked and demystified any chemical that they use in their home. And they're immediately thinking, I now have an idea of how this comes together. So if
Mm.
I wanted to go experiment with this on my own, I have a starting point in my mind, right? And I can search and I can research and I can be an intelligent researcher about how to do this other thing that's different from what I actually did. But what I did demystified something real enough for me to unlock other things. And that's the magic of how we approach the development of our products compared to other experiences kids might have around STEM.
Right. And it's all really rooted in this idea of connecting it to something that they use, something that they
Yes,
know in their
very
life.
much so. Very
Yeah.
much so. Yeah. Because the bottom line is if I can get you to understand that things are not rocket science, then I can get you to think as a producer, right? Because
Mhm.
if you encounter something that seems interesting to you, if you understand how to decompose that thing in your mind, you can very quickly think, oh, well, this particular component could be better, right? You can start
Mhm.
to think of how to make something better if you know what the parts are. The problem is, not a lot of people are trained to understand the parts of things. And so they move through the world and they think of things in wholes and things in black boxes. And the people that make them are geniuses, not because they're super smart, but just because I have no idea what it takes to do that, I have to assume that you are a super genius to make that
Right.
happen. So one of our favorite things, we do a unit where they build a computer, and these girls literally cannot believe that they actually built a computer. And in many cases, their test of whether this is real is if they can get on to YouTube. So they're like, this is not real until I can actually log onto
Yeah.
YouTube, and then that makes it real. And then they're freaked out, like, wow, like I did that. And you're like, yes, you did that, right? So
Right.
everything can be figured out, everything can be done, but it has to be age appropriate. It has to be, we have to hook them with things that they actually care about.
Yeah. Um, it's really inspiring, and I feel even just hearing that story, a sense of empowerment around
Yeah.
my own life,
Yeah.
and going home and thinking about the things in my life.
Around you,
So,
right?
yeah, that's so awesome. How do you think about, because you mentioned that for the most part, you're not in the room when,
Yeah.
girls are using your products. So, um, how do you think about recommendations to those 3 audiences that we talked about? Um, business leaders who are thinking about the workforce and the
Mhm.
STEM capabilities of the workforce, teachers who are thinking about how to bring these concepts to life, and parents who are, key to making sure that, students have access to different kinds of opportunities. What kinds of, if we were in the room with a business leader right now, what is one, ask or one recommendation that you would make to that person based on your work?
Yeah, so I would say for corporations, the biggest opportunity is actually designing cohesive programming around this. So a lot of corporations try their best, like their efforts at this is sort of like, we're going to have one big event and we're going to have our employees volunteer, or we're going to bring some students over. It's always this sort of like one-off thing happening once a year to sort of celebrate, like we're pulling the community in. That does not do it, right? That's nice as sort of a brand image and brand awareness exercise, but for companies that truly care and can make the connection, if they take the time to, with this is a talent I'm going to need in the future. They live in my community. I want them to think of me as a potential employer as they go out into the world and think, hey, if I do this, I can come back to this company and work for. Then what needs to happen is a series of consistent positive experiences. So in a year, you can design multiple, and that's what we do with companies, is design multiple touches that are meaningful. They don't all have to be big, a variety. So you might have that one big event, but prior to that, you've had, you know, 10 other smaller or medium-sized touches that could look in multiple different ways. For some companies, we have kits that they deploy in classrooms. You could design case studies that include your company's stories and real things that happen within your company that can be used in the classroom. Yes, you can send volunteers, but send them purposefully,
Mm.
with a script so they know what to say, so they understand how to communicate with kids. One of the biggest gaps is adults actually don't know how to talk about their work with kids. It's not as
Yeah.
easy as you think, because you're used to talking to adults about what you do, and it's hard for you to think about how to say it in a way that kids will understand. So your volunteers actually need training. They need
Mm.
training on how to actually execute this. So really putting together a program that's cohesive. And instead of making that one big investment, breaking it up so that it's more meaningful throughout the year and you can actually track year over year progress, would be my advice for corporations.
That's great. And it's also making me think, I'm going to see my nieces and nephews this weekend, and I'm thinking, how do I talk about
Right, right.
my job to young people? Um, and something I wanna maybe get some feedback on from them over the weekend and see if it lands or not. I'm
That's
curious
a
about
great
that.
idea. I like asking people like, do the young people in your life actually know what you do? And
Yeah.
we ask kids, so when we do pre and post surveys, we actually ask the girls, and if we're in mixed gender environment, boys and girls, we'll ask them both, who do you know in your life that works in STEM? And you'll be surprised how many times they're like, I know no one. And I'm like, you probably do, but you don't know that they do, right? And those are
Right.
people that are the closest to you. And if we can have influence when we have that kind of proximity, then you can see how this problem sort of exacerbates across the across our networks at large when we pull the society together. But that's definitely a big gap for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely can see that. Well, what about that second group, the teachers and administrators in schools? What kind of recommendation or advice would you give to them?
Yeah, so I think the teachers, the biggest challenge that a school has is they tend to start career technical education in high school and in some cases middle school with electives. And first, the pathways are pretty rigid with CTE, so they've like, which is career technical education. So they might say like there's a technical pathway, there's a trade pathway, like they're really set. And what they're hoping is that kids navigate their way through and then get to high school and pick one of these pathways to explore. And really, it needs to start so much earlier. Part of the problem is what we're saying. I feel like our job, my company, is really to be translators because,
Mm,
again, in the school environment, it's a struggle for generalists who are teaching at the elementary school level, um, to try to really speak the language of STEM in a way that's engaging at that age and age appropriate, right? And so not having the tools to do that makes it really hard for schools. I think the challenge for schools will be, and that's why we're designing products to really fill that gap, is how can we put products in the hands of teachers that emphasize, that removes the emphasis on them being an expert at all these different STEM disciplines, because that's not going to happen, but allows them to focus on what they do best, which is the teaching of it, but use technology, use hands-on experiences to really drive the actual learning itself. So I think the thing for schools is really just to be aware, like aware that their work needs to start much earlier, starting elementary school,
mhm.
so that when people like myself and others that are working in this space approach them with the idea of let's enhance your curriculum, your science curriculum, with career technical education that's age appropriate at this age, they're more open and receptive to it. Right now, they immediately think, oh, that's a high school thing, and that
Uh,
needs to change. Yeah,
yeah, that makes sense. So bringing it forward into
yeah.
the early years of education. How about for parents?
Parents, this is my favorite group because, I represent that group as well. I think parents get overwhelmed by how many things we all have to do. There's so
Mm,
much on the plate at all times, especially when we're thinking about our kids. But what I find is that the little things add up. Again, I think overall, my big message to all three categories is consistent positive experiences, right? So it's not just that one event a year that you might take your child to. It's actually finding small moments that are going to add up into to sort of like a string of like a playlist of learning experiences sort of just playing in the background of their lives. So for example, I know like for my kids, we would include in our bedtime story routine, we had the book Bedtime Math, right? So that was
Mm,
just building fluency and language around STEM. We would read Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, which is another book that just presented different role models. So books that you would read together at the age where you're still reading books together. Obviously events that you would go to together, but in the toys that you're buying, the good news is that over 90% of parents actually seek out STEM toys, and they do
mm,
believe that toys and informal learning is a great way to develop STEM skills at home. So doing more of that, explaining things, pulling them in when you're trying to solve a problem in the home, versus just doing it yourself. It's those little, very little moments that sort of add up into a big thing. One interesting story in this space for me was, if you remember, the catalyst for me starting the company was my daughters feeling like STEM was a boy thing. Well, about 2 summers ago, they wanted to start exploring sports seriously. And so I put them in a lot of sports camps that summer. And one of them was a week at golf. And I
cool.
picked them up the first day. And they did not like this. And I'm like, what is going on? Why don't you like golf? They were like, first of all, it's hot. Second, they're all boys. There are no girls. And so immediately I'm saying, well, you see what it feels like for most girls when they're in STEM environments without boys. And they looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, what do you mean? I was like, what are you talking about? And my oldest daughter said, Mom, I thought like STEM was a girl thing and it was just boys that didn't really
You're
like
like,
STEM.
yes.
I'm like,
What?
that's how much exposure they had had to
Mm,
STEM over the last couple of years. We've never actually said STEM is a girl or boy thing. It was just
mm,
that there was just so much STEM all around them, and so much like STEM for girls that they now thought seriously were shocked that I was rocking their world when I was like, no, it's the other way around. So it's those little things add up in a very, very significant way.
yeah.
Just the exposure, and the intention to make sure that you are incorporating in their day and in your conversations as much as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. I love that intentionality, and I think that can apply to lots of different,
Yeah.
topics, but being intentional about how you bring them in. Well, thank you so much, Abby, for all of your insights and for sharing your stories today. I'd love to close us out with a quick lightning round of questions, if that's all right.
Yes, of course.
All right, great. So our first lightning round question is, what are you reading, watching, or listening to right now that's energizing you?
So I'll start first with what I am watching. Um, I so over the weekend, I there's a new show on Netflix called Forever
Okay,
that really captivated me. I haven't been captivated by a show like that in a very long time. And I think what was really fun about this story, it's a story about young love. It's actually Judy Blume's Forever being retold through the lens of Black adolescence.
cool.
And although it's about these two kids falling in love, I think what was really amazing about it is it brought up very interesting parenting dynamics and scenarios that are coming up for me as my kids get older. And so it forced you to sort of experience those emotions, like you're thinking about, okay, as your kids become teenagers, how much you let go of the leash, how much you allowed them to experience hurt, how much do you
Mm,
allow them to think through their own futures without how much do you interfere, and just the way it made you feel through that was very, very well done. So highly recommend Forever. I'm also watching Friends and Neighbors on Apple, which is just a very fun show with John Hamm, and the premise of it is a very wealthy guy that loses his job and then starts robbing his
oh
neighbors
my goodness.
and pawning their things. So that one's an interesting, fun watch.
More
So
of a
yeah, that's what I'm watching.
fantasy side.
Yes,
Less
exactly.
reality there
It's
for
an
you.
interesting twist. Yeah. Um, But yeah, so that's what I'm watching. And then I would also say I'm reading The Artist's Way, which I have heard about for many, many years, but I haven't had the time to just sit with it. And this year I promised myself to allow myself to write more. I used to write a lot, and then I got busy with work, and I just don't get into that place as often as I like. And so the artist way is my way of forcing myself to unleash my inner artist.
That's
It's
awesome.
specifically my inner writer again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, you're inspiring me to crack open the copy that we have at home. I haven't.
Oh yeah.
All right, second question. What is something that's on your unofficial resume?
I would say tea connoisseur. I
Ooh,
am not a coffee girl at all. I don't get coffee. I don't understand what people get out of it. But tea, that is my jam. I love blending tea together. I'm kind of a mixologist when it comes to
cool.
when it comes to tea. So I find different flavors, and I like to steep like tea myself. So I don't really use bags for the most part. I'm using the loose leaf teas and mixing flavors together, and it's just my favorite relaxing beverage.
Nice. That sounds awesome. All right, last one. If you could wave a magic wand and give everyone one leadership skill, what skill would you give us all?
I would give us all the skill of empathy. I feel like empathy is so underrated. And empathy is what makes leaders human. I think it allows them to lead in a human way. And it also lines up with, the golden rule of, treating others the way that you would want to be treated. You really need empathy for that. Empathy has led me to do things differently with how I lead my team. When I think about like what should flex work look like on our team, that's I have to dig deep and be empathetic about how I feel like I would want my workplace to be like if I was not in charge, right? In order to design that. When we earlier this year we had some of our contracts that were tied to like federal funding cut off. Empathy was what I sort of leaned into to think about how should I approach this with my team, and what would they want to know? What would I want to know, if I was the leader? And so I feel like if everyone was truly empathetic, we would enjoy working with and working for each other a lot more.
Mhm. Advice to take to heart for sure. Thank you so much, Abby, for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us for episode 231 of Navigating Now. You can join us here every week on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Central, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.